Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Carla 2020. I am Victoria Thomas. I am one of the program advisors and also the moderator for this panel. Before we start off this discussion, I'm just going to read out the Carla Pledge, which you've all signed up to as you got your ticket. I declare that I do not and will not condone any forms of discrimination by myself or perpetrated by others on the basis of ethnicity, religion, geographical origin, skin color, religious beliefs, sexuality, gender identity, socioeconomic class, disability, or age. I equally declare that I do not and will not tolerate sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, fascism, and any other isms. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to our panel. And we're just going to do some introduction at the moment. I'll let everybody introduce themselves and just sort of tell you what their first education via cinema was, their first vivid encounter with film. So we'll start off with Akua Gyamfi from the British Blacklist.
Hi, and my name is Akua Gyamfi. I founded the British Blacklist, and it's an online platform that celebrates British Black creatives across screen, stage, literature, and sound. And my first experience of cinema, I'm going to try and say, well, I'm going to try and apply it to two films, possibly, hopefully. So the first film I remember, and it wasn't necessarily my favorite film, however, it was a film where it was The Lost Boys, that starred Kiefer Sutherland, Corey Haim, Corey Feldman. It was like a teen YA type film about vampires. I was very obsessed with vampires and Stephen King books. However, Lost Boys, for some reason, I wrote out the whole script in an exercise book, and I wrote it out painstakingly, stopped, paused, unpaused, wrote the lines, had the names on the left-hand side, and everyone's, lines, line for line. So, and I knew that film off by heart, and I don't know why I chose that film specifically, and I was in middle school, so I may have been like between 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, around those ages. I just don't know why I did it, but that was my first maybe experience of thinking about writing for film. I never wanted to be a filmmaker, but that was something that I did, and I have no idea why. But later in life, I've been a script consultant, and I do love reading scripts and analysing them. And the other film that I feel really defines the importance and power of film, I will condense into House Party, Colour Purple, Crooklyn, and Hairspray, the original Hairspray. Those bunch of films, and yeah, and I won't expand because I'll take up too much time.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting that you love vampires. Did nobody try to take you to church or pray for you?
Mum didn't know. I don't think she really got it. I actually don't know how I snuck Stephen King books into the house at that time, but I was really, can I just throw in Stand By Me as a great book adaptation into film? But yeah, I don't know how I did it, but yes, somehow I survived, and there's no devil sitting in my corner.
Okay, thank you. So, Chi?
Hi, I'm Chi. I'm based in London, but I was born in Vietnam. I actually came to the UK as a boat refugee in the 1980s. I'm an independent filmmaker, but I also, a couple of years ago, co-founded an advocacy group called Beats, which lobbies for screen equality for British, East and Southeast Asians working in the screen and stage industry. I would say my first encounter of cinema was actually at home, not at the cinema. And I remember watching a Spielberg film. I don't know which one. I think it was E.T., but I remember being kind of struck at the time how like amazing and magical it was. And I just remember the moment it left with me. And I remember thinking that it was very cool, and I wanted that job. I kind of crystallized it into that moment. I think I was around about 6 or 7. And then when I was kind of older, movies have always been with me, but we didn't get to go to the cinema very often. So I kind of got all of my film education through the local Blockbuster, or our local very dingy kind of video rental place. It was like one of my most favorite things to do, like on a Friday after school, head over there. They would usually have you could rent 10 out for a couple of quid. It was like the most awesome thing ever. And that was my encounter into film. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Next we'll move on to Pamela Drameh.
Hi, I'm Pamela Drama. I am a producer, and I also work in post-production for STX International. And the first time I encountered cinema, I've kind of got two things that kind of stick out quite a lot. So I grew up in Gambia between the ages of like 5 and 10. And we had an uncle who used to bring over his like NTSC video player and plug it into our TV because he'd had videos from America. And watching Batman, I was way too young for all of these films, but Batman, Pretty Woman, not really understanding all of Pretty Woman, but loving the bit where she's like, big mistake. And My Girl, and sobbing when Macaulay Culkin gets stung by the bees and dies. Because I think it's probably the first time I've seen someone die on screen. And my aunt going, "You've got Home Alone. I don't know why you're crying." So that was the first one, just like being really engaged with these stories and just really enjoying storytelling. Bugsy Malone was a big one. My cousin and I used to reenact all the time. And then the second one was in sixth form when my French teacher gave me a VHS copy that she'd made of TV of this film called Plan Soleil, which is like a 1956 version of Count and Mr. Ripley with Alain Delon. First of all, I didn't know people in 1956 were as good looking as Alain Delon. And I didn't know that films in the olden days had like sex and intrigue and murder. Like I had all these preconceptions that just completely both. So that's when I got interested in like, I guess like foreign non-English speaking cinema.
Okay.
That was it.
Thank you very much. And Abbesi.
So hello, thank you for having me. My name is Abbesi Akhamie and I'm actually based right now in Virginia. And I am an independent filmmaker, so I write, direct, and also produce a bit. And my first encounter with cinema, very vivid for me, was when I was in high school, in my final year of high school, and across the street from my high school was the mall. And at the mall, there was a movie theater, and everyone had been talking about this film called Slumdog Millionaire. It was just going through the hallways, buzzing around our classes. And so a group of friends and I were like, okay, we're finally gonna go see this movie. Trailer looks good, awesome. And so we went to the theater and saw that film, and that's when I decided at that moment. I had been doing like little film things prior to that, but it was in that moment that I felt like this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. And I guess like the academic me today would probably see so many issues and problems with the film, but as like a 17-year-old teenager, it was the most spectacular thing in film that I had seen. And I don't think it was by coincidence that the director was British and it was Indian British actors, and that's just what I've always been kind of international films is what I like in the style. So, yeah, that's me.
That's great. Trivia about Slumdog Millionaire, because a lot of people don't seem to realize that there were two directors to that film, and the second director,
yes, there was
female.
A co-director. She was yes. I see. We don't even bring up her name much, but I don't know that a lot of people know that, so I just say director. But there was actually a co-director. Yeah.
And last but not least, I'll introduce myself. I am a filmmaker and film educator. I currently run the Masters in International Film Business Program at London Film School. And my cinema education started very early. I can't remember the very first film that I saw, but I'm an only child, so that was the experiment, and cinema was my babysitter. And my mom actually quit her job because she was a midwife. And she used to come home, after night shift, and she would find me and my dad asleep on the floor in the living room, and the TV still on. And because my dad was a big cinephile, and so he had like shelves and shelves and shelves of movies. And so they always used to just leave me with a film. It was literally a film or a book. But I remember following, and my dad watched everything. He had everything from Orson Welles movies to Hitchcock, Kung Fu movies, Bollywood, and action movies. But I remember being drawn to the action movies and somehow kind of fell in love with Bond. And so my favorite films growing up was like Goldfinger, A View to Kill, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And it was only a couple of years ago I began to realize why those particular films stood out for me. Because I don't think, of course, I grew up in East and West Africa. So race was not a thing for me. But I didn't even realize that one of the reasons why A View to Kill fascinated me was probably the first time I saw a Black woman on film, and she was kicking ass with Grace Jones. And then Goldfinger, I now realize is very problematic. Like last year was the first time I was watching it, and I'm thinking, God, Bond is sexist. Because I remember there was a scene in Goldfinger, quite at the start, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, where he's with a girl and a woman rather, and one of his colleagues comes to get him, and he sort of tries to show her off, and she doesn't want to go. And he basically turns to her and he goes, man talk. And she walks away and he slaps her bum. And I remember at that point thinking, I've been probably watching this film every month for over 20 years. And it's just this moment that it hit me how sexist it was. But at the same time, the scene that I rewound the most in Goldfinger was when the women came down with the helicopters. And again, I didn't realize why at the time. It was only recently that it occurred to me that it was probably the first Bond film where the women were doing something other than being a concubine for Bond. And I know those women were, again, they're problematic. Everybody was blonde, big boobs, like her catsuit, but they were still flying helicopters. And I remember thinking I wanted to be a pilot for such a long time. And I used to remake that film over and over. And it was quite funny because all my cousins my age were all boys. And I, of course, Nollywood style, I was the writer, director, producer, editor, sound coordinator, everything. But I was also always Bond. And I used to cast my male cousins as the women. And I would literally, put like a blouse on them and hold it back with elastic band to give them a ponytail and all that sort of thing. But it never occurred to me at the time that I couldn't be Bond or that Bond had to be a man. Like, I was so innocent that for me, anything was possible. And so when I went to film school on the very first day, we were all asked, what's your favorite film? And I sort of said, Goldfinger. And people started laughing because initially they thought I was joking. And I could not understand what was funny. And it took a while for even the tutor to realize I was being serious. And then I sort of came across this thing where I realized that there was something defined as cinema and something that wasn't. And the right answer in that moment should have been Vertigo or Pulp Fiction or Citizen Kane. But I had come to film school to make action movies. And that sight made me a problem because I remember my teacher sort of saying to me, well, do you want to make films or do you want to make money? And I was like, well, I want to do both. And I became literally the class joke. And so every time I felt like they would always ask me a question because they wanted to hear what I would say, because whatever I would say became so funny for them because it didn't fit the mold. Which is why we're having this discussion today about decolonization of cinema and film education, how we encounter cinema, what impression it gives us of ourselves and the world. And when we're teaching films, what are we actually telling people about the world in which we live? So I remember, for example, having a very problematic discussion when one of the first films we saw was Birth of a Nation. I think it's one of a very successful film. And of course, it's a film that was very advanced technologically at its time. And when we were doing critical film theory, we had to all say something about the films that we watched. And I remember watching the film and I remember thinking to myself, this is really racist. And so, of course, when it was my turn, that was what I commented on. And I was stopped probably by the second sentence by the tutor who told me to just talk about the film and to talk about politics. And I couldn't understand why I could not comment about the story and what it said to me. And he said to me, don't be sensitive. You need to think as a filmmaker. And of course, I had trained as a lawyer and I was in a film school now with this legal background. And I remember sort of saying to him, well, were critics at the time Black or even women? Because if we can only talk about film within the context of which it's always been discussed, and the majority of the people who were allowed to do that at the time were white men, are you asking me to consider film only as a white man, which I'm not? Because maybe a white man living in America at the time would not see anything wrong with the film because that was society and what it encouraged. But for me as a Black woman, I have a very different response to it. And if a Black woman at the time had the voice that we have now, they would have probably had a different response to it in academia. So all of you, I know you've been to film schools at some point and sort of had some sort of film education. How did you find your curriculums? Like when you were watching films? I'm sure some of you saw Birth of a Nation. Like, were you allowed to discuss the films outside their cinematic merits?
I'll go. So I did film studies, which was purely theoretical, not really, no practical elements at all. I also did it alongside French, which is actually quite a good combination because you have a French class with dealing with phonetics, and then you have a film class dealing with Levi Strauss again and talking about film as a language. And the difference that I noticed between, so we didn't actually watch Birth of the Nation at all. We watched a lot of Eisenstein and sort of, but definitely I remember one class like having to read the same film from a Marxist point of view, a feminist point of view, and all of these different points of view. So we never looked at film in film studies from a without any context to it. So it's really interesting to hear that in film, like on a more practical course, that was taken away from it. Because in film studies, context was sort of part of everything to do with the film. So yeah, I find that super interesting. And then I forgot what the rest of the question was.
I will say that I didn't go to film. I did my degree in journalism, but I did a multimedia course, and then I did a journalism degree. And I'm not sure where I did an article or an essay on where Birth of a Nation was something I had to dissect and understand. And it was just interesting. So I have no context for just that I knew about it on my course, and there was a reason. And I did an article referencing it and the visuals in that film. And I just want to tie that to in being in middle school and being thrown out of my history class because I had my knowledge of racism in art was shaped by books because I was an avid book reader. We didn't have access. My mum didn't take me to the cinema, and we didn't have, cable back then, being old. We didn't have those kind of access to films. And in the UK, the films were James Bond, which ironically I couldn't stand. I must say I'd like to revisit them all now, but and I have enjoyed the modern set just as a by the way. But growing up, I didn't like James Bond. I just associated with absolute nothing to reference me, nothing to do with me, and very a culture that left me out. But so my knowledge of history and Black history was very African American through books, Color Purple, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sing, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, books like that. And so going into school and saying, having that one sentence dedicated to slavery, and my knowledge that there was much more than one sentence, and there was a lot more involvement from the UK than as my history teacher was trying to tell me. He, as a man, a white man, kicked me out of my class and told me, I think I swore at him because I was so frustrated because he was telling me that I was being rude because I wanted to challenge what he was saying about this one sentence about slavery. So, but that's just I guess I didn't see Birth of a Nation in that way, but art definitely shaped my knowledge, and it was my version of having that conflict with what I knew being shut down by someone who's supposed to be educated, who's supposed to have a wider view and supposed to shape my view, but yet he was limiting the view of the whole class actually and myself. So it's just a kind of relatable story.
I think also because in the UK as well, racism tends to be posited as an American thing.
Yeah.
So, for example, with the Birth of a Nation, basically you being African American and African, and of course you studied at NYU. How did that film affect you or other films that you saw? Because of course America is kind of closer to the history of race that we see in films because cinema kind of started with Hollywood.
Right. So like you said, I went to New York University and I was in the master's film program, very competitive programs to get into. And so like starting there, it's just the classes are not very big. And I remember that to my knowledge, Birth of a Nation was only referenced in one class, which was for editing. And the professor of the class did kind of like do not a huge preface, but just like a one sentence thing, and said, this film is a very racist film. And that, but it was kind of like, it was a very racist film, but it is something that is talked about to this day because of its historical, the way that this person did the cuts. And I'll say honestly, like, I don't really remember what it was that is so spectacular about Birth of a Nation and what the cutting was. And I've heard arguments, like I try to just listen to all around, like I've heard arguments that there are several other films maybe not in that specific year, but there are several other films that talk or do the same exact thing that film does that, you know, could be referenced instead of this one. So if it is problematic and it makes students uncomfortable, you know, why continue to show it and just keep saying like, well, it's a racist film, but, you know, it's this sort of thing. So when I saw it, I had saw Birth of a Nation when I was in undergrad for a course entitled Slavery in Film. So I knew about the film, and I wasn't so, just because I think of my personality type, I wasn't like, I wasn't taken to heart. I didn't go to my chair, but there were other people who did, other Black students who did go to the chair and complain that, why is this film being shown when it is obviously racist and offensive to people? So I think I would say most, you know, I don't know. I think maybe most Black people will definitely be offended by this film. I'm probably like an outlier where I'm just like, what's new? Like, I'm just like, it is like, I think that it is good to say and preface, and not even just preface, but, you know, really dig into what this film was, why it was created, so that people know, because not only just white, non-Black people as a whole, white people don't know the history. And so when you're just showing the film and you don't do as much due diligence explaining things, people will walk around just like straight up ignorant. That's how you can put it. Like, oh yeah, I didn't know this was, you know, a racist film, or I didn't know that the reason that there was a civil war was about slavery. Like, people are, yeah. So,
I mean, cinema can be quite impactful because we all sort of know that the KKK got burning crosses. If you see burning crosses anywhere nowadays in the film, nobody needs to tell you that it's the Ku Klux Klan. But they never used to burn crosses before Birth of a Nation, because that's how powerful cinema is. So the imagery that we put forward as filmmakers does affect the world. In your experience in film school, did you see yourself reflected in the films that were used to teach you about cinema and making films?
Oh, so I've got a really bad answer to this. So I went to the Northern Film School, and it was like a 100% practical postgrad and masters. We didn't watch films, we just made films. We were meant to kind of watch films off our own bat. There wasn't really a screening program, like the idea that we will now see films. Now and again, we'd had like visiting lecturers, the idea that somebody, you know, a director just made something and would show it to students. That would happen so kind of rarely. So there was no kind of film studies element to it whatsoever. So I don't feel I have a good answer, but very recently at Beats, we got funded this fellowship program, which is mentoring. And because today's topic is about decolonization, what I'm finding I'm having to do a great deal is almost kind of set out at the very beginning, like certain context for things. And so when I think back now at film school, I wish that, like, even if they hadn't shown films, that there was a moment where we talked about, you know, women and race and class and, you know, disabilities and everything, and kind of put those like on the center stage and like create those kind of contexts, you know, and things like that. And I think that would be really, really valuable. And I'm finding constantly that I'm doing that in things, you know, that I work on, whether it's advocacy or whether it's my kind of productions, like kind of setting those kind of contexts. So not just saying we're going to inherit what we have in the system already, but saying actually this is our work culture. So, but at film school, I didn't have that. And I think, you know, I went to film school right after my degree. It took a long time for me as a Vietnamese person living in the UK to come to terms of who I was. Like, I believed probably in my 20s, this idea of meritocracy, that I would just work hard and get somewhere. I believe that, and I don't believe in that anymore. And, you know, what I tried to do is I was that kind of, you know, that agreeable minority person, because I wanted to fit in and I didn't want the pressures of other things. So I actually came to understanding who I was kind of much later in my life. And I think that's because in school, in film school, in the work, there isn't like this culture where we talk about these things that are actually, you know, as important as, you know, they're really important, like our race, where we come from, and all those things.
Yeah, but I think context is becoming like an increasing thing nowadays that everybody's talking about. And of course, 2020 seems to be the year of global awakening after George Floyd, and probably thanks to the pandemic, everybody's sort of reassessing what's really important and how they interact with each other. But of course, this year there was the big thing about Gone with the Wind, for example, which again was a film that I really loved when I was growing up. It's interesting how all of these things just kind of went completely over my head when I was a kid. And somebody like Cameron Bailey from Toronto International Film Festival did sort of come out and say that he didn't feel as though the film should be banned, but it should be sort of discussed within the context. Because I don't think we talk about the context, which I think is probably what the important thing is. I think if we can actually specifically say some of these things are wrong, like we specify that the film is too violent, you know, and we give it a rating for people to watch. So should there be room maybe for a rating about gender, homophobia, race in film? Because once upon a time, it was illegal to be gay. It was illegal for women to vote. It was illegal for Black people and Irish people to go through the front door. And so when people made films in those eras, those things were prevalent in the films, and it wasn't always a criticism of those inequalities. It was presented as the status quo. So should we continue to watch these films, but give them some sort of a rating, maybe an O rating to say it's offensive, you know, or should we just watch everything because it's cinema and it's great and it's art, and we should focus on that?
I mean, I love the idea of a rating, but I would like it to go further. So when you sent the questions yesterday, it like kind of set me thinking. And I, you know, naturally, like, rating is something that people have been playing with. There's the F rating, I think, if that's what it's called. But I kind of think, you know, all these people that love Gone with the Wind, like, I want to know who these people are, right? It's kind of awesome to get them in a cinema, right? Every year they kind of celebrate, I don't know, Gone with the Wind. But I'd want to watch, like, say, okay, if you want to watch this, then you have to watch, like, Ava DuVernay's 13th before you watch it. And I kind of give them the education before they kind of see it. So there's kind of like, you're going to have to, you know, if you guys want to still see these films, and I agree, like, you know, we shouldn't, I don't think we should just erase art, erase cinema. I think we have to kind of sit with how it makes us feel uncomfortable. We have to learn from it. We have to kind of confront our discomfort or whatever it is. But we also should be watching other stuff to help us kind of do that. So I kind of want to say, if you want to watch Gone with the Wind, you have to watch this other thing too, you know, and something like that.
I think, does that come down to like talking to programmers as well? Because if you're going to program Gone with the Wind, then you need to program other films that will give it context. And then that way you create, because that's part of film education.
Yeah.
So rather than watching, you know, like people tend to, you know, I know that you have like kind of Gone with the Wind, like Gone with the Wind is playing on its own in a local cinema. There is zero context, but it's exactly like she said, if you play other things around it, and then you're kind of educating people and entertaining them at the same point, because nobody wants to watch a lecture before watching. I still enjoy Gone with the Wind. I shouldn't say enjoy, because I haven't watched it for many years, because it's like 1,000,000 hours long. But I've always known the context and still sort of rolled my eyes at the parts that need to roll your eyes at, but still, I can still appreciate the filmmaking that it was for its time, and it's very luxurious looking and all of those sorts of things. So I think, yeah, context is everything. And I think programmers need to take that more into account as well.
Yeah, because I think I always have an issue with how people let programmers and gatekeepers get away with what we get to see. Because every year around March, we have literally the same argument about Oscars so white and BAFTA so white in the past 3 or 4 years. And I'm somebody who's always been on the side of the awards, because I've always been like, well, they can't award films that have not been made. You know, so when we talk about the sort of films that we get to see, the question is, who is making the decisions about actually what gets made and what gets supported for audiences to see? Because that, I think, is part of the problem. So I know we talk a lot of, for example, like people are always stereotyped in films, but I'm pretty sure if I speak to a lot of my friends who are of Asian descent or African descent, there's so many of them with amazing scripts that's not about the stereotypes that we normally see. However, they can't get those films funded. But the people who come up with the films about Africa with poverty, war, AIDS, you know, are the ones who will always get the money, you know, or the war in Germany. I mean, I'm still trying to find films from Germany that are not about Hitler. Not that you shouldn't make films about Hitler or the Holocaust, but, you know, I'm sure that they're German rom-coms, you know. I remember, well, Crazy Rich Asians, I know a lot of Asians laugh at it, but there was a part of me that liked it because I saw Asians in a very different context to what we normally see. But I felt like, you know, there should be room for Crazy Rich Asians as much as there was room for like The Farewell, which was made by, you know, a Chinese American filmmaker. And I think a lot of Asians found that quite sort of like authentic. So I wonder, but when it comes down to colonialism, how much of this has to do with power and who gets to tell stories, and how do we change this sort of power structure? Because if a lot of Black filmmakers have been allowed to make films at the time when Gone with the Wind was made, would it even matter? Would Gone with the Wind matter? Or does it matter more that it exists because there are no other perspectives?
I think, I don't think it's a question of, Gone with the Wind will always matter because of power, right? And it's because Hollywood at large sees itself as the powerful owner of the stories that everybody needs to watch. Hollywood, white Hollywood, is the stuff that we all grew up on, and believing that that was the benchmark of life. Everything, culture, is about how Hollywood presents it. So Gone with the Wind, even if there were 100 Black films at that time that were powerful, insightful, funny, bad, whatever, it would still matter if the people in power are still the same people who made Gone with the Wind, right? So Gone with the Wind matters. I think it needs to be there. I don't believe in removing stuff. I agree with everyone that's talking about it has to be contextual. It has to be contextualized so that people understand, well, yeah, this is where it comes from and this is why it exists. However, this was what was going on at the time. And it is about, I mean, again, with the work that I do with British Blacklist, it's always that, and especially in the UK, everything gets shoved at Hollywood. I mentioned Hollywood itself, but in the UK, we have a real problem. And I agree with you, Victoria, that when it comes to award season, I get rolled out to talk about the problem with the industry and stuff, with awards. But I also agree, it's not the awards, it's the awards have their issue with members not watching every single film or giving conscious critique rather than, you know, letting their biases and prejudices take over. However, if the industry doesn't change, if the industry doesn't open its doors and let people of color or people from marginalized groups tell the stories the way they want to tell them without being dictated to by a person, usually a white man, who has his view of what this marginalized person's life should look like on screen, this is why the industry is not changing. And this is why we have this problem, this constant go around every award season. It's not the awards' fault. They need to do their thing with the members, but it is the industry at large. And it's like, how long is a piece of string? Because we keep saying it. We've been saying it, that, you know, let us in, let us tell our stories. And if you don't want to move, give us a seat at your table. Let us create our own. And unfortunately, if you dominate an industry and expect everybody to feed into the industry that you dominate, you have to move over a bit. If it's something where we've all got equal hand in it, we can then just do what we want. We don't have to ask for it. But unfortunately, there's been a system that white people have dominated this part of the world, this part of this industry, I should say. And we are all supposed to go, we all like going to the cinema. We all, you know, there's a bunch of us that want to make films. There's a bunch of us that want to be in this space. But if we can't because we're held back, then someone has to budge over. And it's just literally that. I don't think there's any special remedy. There's no special formula. It's just move over or give us the funding. Let us build our industries and stop being so scared of the competition as well. Because there's an element of shutting people out because they don't want us to have that power and that unity, because it's so effective. The fact that the Ku Klux Klan branded themselves based on a film, you know, are they scared when we watch Black Panther? We're going to go out in the streets. The Black Panther, as in the movement, not the Marvel film. So,
yeah, I just want to add too that it's, to me, it becomes where it's very insidious, and the way that these high institutions operate, because they have the power. So it's not only a matter of, okay, yeah, we can give Black filmmakers and other minority filmmakers money and things like that to make and tell the stories. But then there's the extra step of, how do we now get these films out into the world? Whereas for them, it's easy to do a remake of Top Gun. And even though maybe people don't even really want to watch that, but they're going to push it out and make sure everybody can see it. But the minute that somebody wants to make something about, I don't know, Like like even Black Panther. Oh, well, you know, nobody's going to go and watch it. Or there's always some excuse. So that's why I feel like it becomes insidious, because it's like that it's almost like evil lurking, and it's not something that you can necessarily like point out and call it out for what it is. Then people just deny it. Like, no, that's not what we're doing. But it is what you're doing, because you just refuse to acknowledge or see that this is all a part of the grand system. And what we're trying to do is break down this system. And then there's a resistance to that by saying that there's really no problem, or we'll just give you money to make your film. Oh, the film didn't do good, but where was the money for marketing and distribution? What about that? Where was the power, the Hollywood engine power that's needed to get these films out into the world? So
I guess
sorry.
Go ahead, Pam, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, just like going back to like the whole idea of like film schools and decolonizing film school programs, and what she was saying, it's really interesting that yours was like purely practical, but then they expected you to do your own, like to watch films on your own bat, but I'm guessing with very little guidance. And something just made me think of Moonlight and Barry Jenkins. And Barry Jenkins for me was one of the first Black filmmakers, maybe not just Black, but like Black and like more recent filmmakers who had a similar film education to me, because he was referencing Wong Kar-wai and all of these films that I had studied in film studies, and like I think he'd done a lot of theory, and I was like, there was definitely things like, if we show, I know that I got to film school and I was like, shit, they're still teaching the auteur theory. Like I thought that was dead. I thought that was like dead and put to work. Like the director is not the leader of a film. Film is a collaborative effort. And yeah, it's interesting that like so many of the people that I know from film school adore Christopher Nolan, who is someone who I think thinks of himself as an auteur. You know, it's the Christopher Nolan show. And I think so part of that is showing more films from other countries. And like and when you do that, you end up with something like Moonlight, which is beautiful, but you can definitely see the influences of other world cinema. Another film is The Matrix. Like without Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger, you have no The Matrix. Like again, like one of my favorite essays that I ever wrote was talking about globalization and how that affected The Matrix, and that without that work being done, that wire work being done with Ang Lee and all of those people in China, we would have no Matrix. And that so global, I think there's colonization, which is one thing, and I think globalization is a different thing. And I think that's where we need to lean towards and go more towards, and that benefits everybody involved.
Yeah, I think like somebody was saying earlier, is how do we change the power or redistribute the power, right? And of course, I'm now in the position where I am now in a film school and having influence on curriculum. And I remember, you know, when I first started the job, I looked at the list of visiting tutors, and I'm pretty sure it was 95% male and white. And the majority of them had not made a film in the last decade. But, you know, they were industry titans. You know, they had that thing going for them. And to me, I didn't even think of it as decolonization. I just sort of felt like, well, if I'm teaching master's executives to go out into the world to talk about film, international film business today, the curriculum and the people coming in have to look like the international film business. So immediately it was sort of like, well, let me just find people who represent the international film business. In fact, she was one of the visiting teachers that I brought in. And I would safely say that London Film School was very supportive of that. In fact, the conversation in London Film School has always been about decolonization. But I most certainly had at least one colleague who took that as an offense, you know, and they saw it as me coming in to probably change stuff or get rid of their friends or their heroes. And I remember him kicking up such a fuss. And you'd almost think that I just kind of opened up the gates of hell to Lucifer and kind of go, come in. You know, and I remember sitting there, I could not think of what was wrong, because I felt like, you know, I'm adding value because I'm bringing like fresh voices, people who are players to, you know, like Producers Network. You can't get in if you have not made a film in the last 5 years or last 3 years. So why are we talking about international film business, but you don't think it's okay to bring in people who are current players. And so one of the things about the redistribution of power that I think could be problematic is the people who are there protecting the status quo as it is. Even though we're talking about it, are they actually willing to allow for change? Or are people going to see it as a takeover?
I think I'll just add to that. There are people that are going to be like that. They're not going to be willing to give up their power, but there are going to be some that are willing to, that see what is happening and what is going on, and they will be willing to give up their seat. And it's almost those people that I feel like I want to put my vote towards them. Not to say that they're also not a part of the problem and they're not problematic, but this is like a constant fight. It's not something that's going to be done and finished overnight. So if you can find allyship with people that are willing to kind of work with you, because I've also said this to many people, like, this is not something that one group of people, like, let's first say, for an example, Black people can just get what we want. It's also just not in our nature to just start pulling out guns and shooting people because we didn't get what we wanted. The way that we kind of, like, at least I would say on the American side of things, is like we protest and we do those sorts of things. And oftentimes it has, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but there are times when a white person has to pass that law or give up their seat. You don't see them in the forefront, in the view front, because a lot of that acclaim is given to the Black person as to not marginalize them. But there are white people who work behind the scenes and do things. So just wrapping up to your point, there are going to be a lot of people who try to fight, but then there are going to be people who will be willing to give up some of their power, if not all of it.
Chief?
Yeah, so just kind of listening to that and kind of growing from what you started with. I suppose one of the things I wanted to talk about in this kind of conversation, like in terms of this shifting of power, is like, we've had this diversity kind of conversation quite a lot in the industry. It's like, it comes around again. And there's usually like some kind of symbolic gestures that are usually given, you know, schemes and this and that, mentoring, blah, 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 and all these things. And, you know, the latest of these things is like unconscious bias training, you know, which is like, I think often considered a thing like, oh yeah, I've totally like made myself unracist or whatever now, so I can judge these things and everything's gonna be okay. But I don't see, like, I mean, this has been around for a while now. I don't see how unconscious bias training is going to take us all that way. And yet, time and time again, when anyone brings up this conversation about targets and quotas, because what we're talking about at the end of the day is about power, people get very prickly about what that means about creativity and authorship and things like that. But the truth is, we all know that if we let things play out as they are, we will become an equitable society in probably something like, I don't know, 250 years for women, never mind people of color or people with disabilities or whatever, you know, anybody else. I have like no idea. And it feels like a tough line to have, but I do think we can become this idea of an equitable kind of industry, but quotas is probably going to be one of the fastest ways of getting us there. So, but I know not everybody agrees with that.
You're going to say something, Akua?
Well, just to expand on this, because quotas come up, and Chi, and I really remember who you are and Beats and everything, so hi, properly, is this thing about quotas. People find it scary. No one wants to go into that affirmative action space. However, it's about, for me, it's about accountability. And if it is quotas, then it's quotas. But the industry has to be held accountable for its lack of inclusivity. And that's it. And whatever that means, if you don't get, you know, all these, you know, films get the BFI standards over here. So if you don't hit a certain amount of diverse targets, then you don't get your funding, or you're not eligible for certain award categories and things like that. So you have to be penalized. You have to feel it, and it has to be. There's a bit of there's a business element to culture, race, gender, all the isms, all the marginalized groups. There's a business. If we stick some pound signs or dollar bill signs on top of it, then people might be like, oh, I get it. Because if you have a more inclusive crew, storytelling, actors, all this type of stuff, it brings in the money. So we have to think about it like a business. As everyone, I'm not a filmmaker, but I've been in the peripheral. It's a business. At the end of the day, everyone always talks about it needs to be green. It's got to make green. It's got to make money. So the money is in the fact that if you are more inclusive, your project will be even more received than it would have been if it was just an all-white cast and all-white crew, all that type of stuff. So, and it's been proven time and time again, like Crazy Rich Asians, you've got Black Panther, all these other films, Moonlight. It's proven that in the box office, it's not that risky. So power shift, just put money on the top. Just put money on the top. If it's about, if you want to be super billionaires, this is how you do it. Just become multicultural. It's not that hard. But I think we have to maybe remove the emotion from it. And I'm speaking very, very, far removed from being a filmmaker who's at the heart of it and really wants to tell their creative heart story. But remove the emotion. Like, how do you make this thing business appealing to the people that only care about money and themselves?
Okay, so can I add a bit of nuance to that then? So this idea that diversity is business, and I would totally agree. But what I've seen, and so Victoria, you brought up like Crazy Rich Asians earlier, which is like a massive deal for the Asian American industry. And when that was a success, a lot of things got greenlighted. Now, what we've seen as a result of Crazy Rich Asians being awesome in the UK, the ripple effects was yes, there was this like diversity kind of land grab for like, East Asian centric stuff. But none of that was authored by British East Asians, Southeast Asian people, written by, often they would go to Japan where real Japanese people are and real Chinese people are in China and cast them there. So I often feel when I'm talking like from a point of advocacy, like this whole idea that like, I know like diversity sells, it's the right thing to do and all these things, it's a creative thing to do, but there's nuance and how that is interpreted by the industry. And I find that like when I'm talking to commissioners and funders, they think they're doing us an amazing favor when they go out and commission Giri Haji. They think they're doing an enormous favor by making Singapore Grip and all these films. And they're not, because we're not really part of that movement at the end of the day.
No, and I think the African diaspora probably feels the exact same way. Basically, we've had this conversation where now there's a thing of after Black Panther, everybody's looking for African films, but they want grassroots Africa, which means if you're African in Europe, you're not African enough. But then our stories are not always European enough to be like the European flagship story. But I think it's also quite interesting. I find it very frustrating that even now that we're supposedly opening things up, it's still the colonizers who get to define who we are. It's the colonizers are leading the decolonization process. Is that really decolonization, or is that another form of colonialism where they're now putting our stories where they think it needs to be and having our voices sound the way they think it needs to sound? Yes, you're muted, Chi.
I totally agree with that. So at Beats, we say it's not what you make, it's how you make it. So decolonization for me is like how you do things. So unless you change how you commission, how you hire, how you produce, how you write, how you cast, and all those things, you don't actually change anything. So the BBC going off and making, Giri Haji and Netflix doing that, for me, that's no diversity win. And that's good business, right?
Yeah.
But it's not actually a win. It's shallow, it's disingenuous, it keeps people marginalized at the end of the day.
And yeah, I would add too that could be the thing with quotas. On surface level, I think that they work, but I don't think that they get to the root of the problem. It's just like putting a Band-Aid over something, but it's like it's a Caucasian Band-Aid on black skin, still a Band-Aid, but we're still missing the point, like with these affirmative action kinds of things. But that may be what our option is for right now, and then keep fighting, just keep going and keep fighting. I wonder if, I was thinking like, I wonder if, having more people of color as executives would maybe the changes and all those areas would all start coming together. But it's going to take years. I mean, with Barack Obama as the first Black president of the United States, did we see racism completely disappear? No. So even if we start putting, even if we have minorities and different types of people in these roles that are typically held by white people, it could take decades. And I just hope that people are ready for that long wait.
I think just following up on what you said about execs, because that's kind of what I was coming to, because I've worked in both the studio space and in the independent space. And when you're in the independent world, well, quotas don't really matter because you can't impose quotas on an independent production company that might be one person. Like, I mean, we've all seen like when the credits are like 10 logos long because it's so many different companies to kind of get the money together. So you'd be struggling there. But I think when it comes to studios and it comes to funders, I think that's where having quotas there could be quite useful, because I know from my company that I work for, like I have one skill set that I do there, and they have zero interest in me moving into another one. And so we have a completely all white male senior leadership team. And then they wonder why some projects fail. And I'm sitting there going, I'm right here, like I'm in your building, you know I do this, but I'm not going to say anything because, you know, why? The petty side of me is like, why should I help you when you're not interested? It would all be lip service. I'm going to do this on my own. But I think definitely the studios, the mini studios, mini majors all need to have a serious look at who they're hiring, who's in their marketing teams. In the UK, I don't know of a single UK distributor that has, I know we don't have any black people in our marketing team. The other mini major I worked at doesn't have any black people in its marketing team, and they have released films like Hustlers, Green Book. So what is happening here? And those are all things that need to be looked at and need to be addressed. And let's not even get onto financiers, because that's a whole other ballgame. But I think, yeah, quotas in those aspects of film would actually probably have quite a significant impact on whose stories get told and how they get told and whose gaze it's told from.
Are you going to say something?
I think it's about quotas and stuff like that. But I also think it's the people who are doing. Maybe I'm not adding anything to it, but it's just resonating that it's those people in power who don't want to listen because they have their marginalized view of what that other person will bring to the table, and they might feel like, well, we've visibly got a black person, or we've visibly got someone who's not white, or all the isms, we've got them, and that's it. They're not there to be listened to, they're there to be a visual marker. And then also bringing someone in from those marginalized groups, if they're isolated and don't feel comfortable in speaking up, then they're going to act as, maybe Mammy in the house, do you know what I mean, or the Uncle Tom or whatever, because either for survival they're not going to speak up. For survival, they look, we bought into the colonized line, we're just going to do what we need to do, we're in position, that's enough, take the money and run. Or they're going to live having a frustrated existence, being the token in the room that doesn't have any power, because that happens a lot, people, So yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know what that contributes, but that's a frustration as well, and a fear.
I think it happens a lot because, I am in academia, but I most certainly know that after that one colleague kicked up a fuss, and I have to just specify, he's not from London Film School. Of course, our course is run in partnership with other institutions, and he came from one of the other institutions. I remember it killed my enthusiasm a bit because I also kind of wanted to keep my job. And because I just sort of thought, well, yeah, I want to make this the best course ever, but am I going to be put on the cross for doing it by somebody who is not actually saying why he's, because it's one of those things where you're sitting there and you can see what the problem is. Like, I know you're kicking up a fuss because you don't like the fact that your male friends are being replaced, because that's how you see it. You don't realize that we're enhancing the course to make it better for our paying customers, the students. So suddenly I sort of find myself kind of going, when is the right time to say something? When is the right time to innovate? Am I being too enthusiastic? Should I just sit down and take my salary? And it's quite sad for me to not be wanting to give my best. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, it's clearly not changing anything, because this is somebody who's probably going to go out of their way, to reverse it. And like you said, and I remember, again, now that we're talking about decolonization, I was quite strategically cut out of like planning for curriculum for a term, which he curates. And when I looked at the list of people, he actually went out and hired people to do it. All of them white, all of them British. And then when he was done, I then got a very lengthy email asking for my comments on it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to validate it, you know. And also, if I say anything right now to oppose it, and I could see lots of holes in, you know, how things could be better, you're going to get offended. But you're sort of trying to send it to me right now, so it looks like it was a collaboration, and it was not a collaboration. And, you know, so I didn't reply. I was just like, I'm not going to reply and tell you what I really think. I'm just not going to say a word. And so for me, I think this is where it becomes interesting, that I think the world, we're all acknowledging that we have a problem. And we're all saying that we want a solution. But even in the process of trying to execute solutions, there are roadblocks. So is this just lip service, or are we ever really going to change anything? Like, as filmmakers, do you feel hopeful? You know, because I remember when Slumdog Millionaire came out, everybody wanted the next Slumdog Millionaire. And the amount of times I heard the word the African Slumdog Millionaire. And there were lots of films that were pitched as that, and then it never made the box office. So therefore, African films were not good enough. You know, Crazy Rich Asians happened, and then they were looking for the British version. You know, when Moonlight happened, ooh, Black LGBTQ stories are in. I remember thinking, no, they're not. It was just Moonlight. You know, so I guess my question is, where do we go from here? Do we see a brighter future?
So the optimistic part of me is like, yes, but I think not even optimistic. Yes, but it may not be for us, and it may not be our time. And I'm sort of okay with that, but I also think what has recently changed is the pandemic has changed a lot of things. And for me, I've had very little sympathy with big cinema chains. And obviously I have a lot of empathy for everybody who's going through this and losing their job. However, large cinema chains and exhibitors have been a big blockage in a lot of films getting to audiences. And this whole, like, so between that and then the rise of the streamers, I'm a little bit more hopeful that stories that have it, like, everybody's desperate for content. Theatrical is not coming back in as strong as it can't be as strong as it was while we're living in this COVID-19 world. And so that's where I see like some hope in terms of getting different types of stories out. Now I might be being really maybe way too optimistic, but I feel like the streamers especially have responded, at least outwardly, with a better response than some of the traditional institutions. Some of the studios have already, I think, like, I know that some people are not their biggest fans, but I think Disney have been relatively, I know how people feel about them, but I do think that generally they talk the talk. They don't always walk the walk, but slowly they're getting there. They're changing. It's a big sort of cruise ship to try and steer. So I'm really interested to see what happens in this like post-COVID world, where the big chains and the big blockbusters are like the studios have now gone, oh, we don't need to give you a 70% cut of our money. We can just keep all of this in-house, with Mulan going straight to stream to Disney Plus. Universal have now reduced the window with AMC to 17 days. This is where I think changes can be made, and then it's more direct to audience. So I'm really interested in what's going to happen for filmmakers making things in the next like 5 to 7 years. And let's see what happens. Like, so I'm more optimistic than I was pre-COVID, weirdly, about the way of the world is for people telling stories that are not so mainstream, or are mainstream but just have characters that aren't white. You know, like I want to see more rom-coms from, you know, South Asian filmmakers. I want to see, like, I already like world cinema, but I want from British South Asian, from Black British audiences, from Black British filmmakers, and all of these sorts of things, from French Black filmmakers, and yeah, from the diaspora. So I'm quietly optimistic, but we'll wait and see. I might eat my words in like 5 years' time and be like, this is terrible.
I was excited about Netflix and everything, but again, I think this also brings into something that I always think about when we talk about power structures as well. Because I think even within minorities and marginalized groups, we also have power imbalances. You know, when we talk about narratives about homosexuality, I'm pretty sure we see more films about gay men than about lesbians. You know, when we talk about, if we take like cinema from Asia, we'll probably see more from China and India. It's a massive continent. When we talk about Black cinema, it tends to be dominated by African Americans, you know, not necessarily Africans. And when we talk about African cinema, you know, Netflix had a big splash recently with their Netflix in Africa advert. and I was excited about the collection. And when I went through the collection, 99% of the films were from Nigeria and South Africa, you know, and even the Nigerian films were pretty much Nollywood. And there are other filmmakers within Nigeria that don't make Nollywood style filmmaking. So Netflix as well is a business. So I'm wondering, whilst we're happy about all of these streamers coming in, and of course, they're probably seeing the pound sign on diversity and cashing in on that, is there also another colonization going on within the marginalized groups? Because there's a lot of attention now on African American, South African, Nigeria. And it's quite common nowadays to see something branded African, but when you go in, it's dominated by Nigerians, South Africans, one or two Ghanaians. I have a Nigerian heritage, so I'm not picking on Nigerians, but within our own minority groups as well and marginalized groups, do we also have our own biases, and how do we, like, do you feel comfortable with African Americans and the portrayal of Africans? Because I've seen a lot of Africans in African American films, and I find it quite problematic.
Yeah, we have a lot of unpacking to do because we've lived this colonial existence ourselves. So all our posters of beauty and culture, though we dictate it on a social, I say we, I feel like Black culture, yes, it feeds the wider culture. We're still dominated by Marilyn Monroe, Audrey Hepburn, James Bond, Mad Men, that type of styling. Like the epitome of success is a white man or woman, blonde hair, blue-eyed, all that type of stuff. And we've grown up with that. So it trickles down with colorism, sizeism, all these type of isms that come into it. We have homophobia within our marginalized groups. So we have a lot of unpacking and decolonizing to do within ourselves. The portrayal of Africans from African Americans, I mean, has always been problematic. And it's interesting, this ADOS movement conversation that's happening, which is so heartbreaking to me. But it's very interesting because what African Americans are going through now with I say, okay, if you want to separate it, Black Americans versus any other Black American, whether it be African or Caribbean Americans, this infighting is what we went through in the UK between Africans and Caribbeans. But I feel like we've come a bit further now, and we've been united by Afrobeat music for some reason. And we've got this kind of merged culture. So essentially this is what needs to happen, because I think African Americans are used to being the dominant culture, and then with being led by Nigerians, and the rise of the internet and streamers and all these type of things, where our borders are being diluted and merged because we have more access to stuff. So even the fact that, we talk about in the UK that we only have a few narratives when it comes to the British Black experience. And so something like Top Boy, with Drake bringing it to, enabling it to show in America, they're starting to see another aspect, like we're all not just drinking cups of tea and all this type of stuff. There's a bit of a muddled answer, but we've got a lot of unpacking to do. The borders are breaking down. We just need to cross-pollinate, but there's going to be a time where we're all going to be throwing our stones and our toys out the pram, because everyone's used to being on, African Americans have used to being the dominant culture. I always say I grew up African American, like for real, because everything I inhaled was American. Everything that I was influenced by was African American, and I aspired to be African American, and I'm African heritage. So they're just going to have to understand that, look, we loved them. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. But I just think there's going to be a little bit of infighting and a repurposing and repackaging and unpacking, so that we can then understand that we've got other stories to tell, and we're not going to be telling the same old Black people in the image of white people's stories. And that's basically what a lot of us are doing. Marginalized groups are aspiring to what the status quo is, which is straight and white and capitalist.
That's great. Yeah. We're just running out of time. Go ahead, Abbesi.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just make my, just confirm what you're saying, and that there is, I guess we could say, a form of colonization amongst minority groups. I mean, I saw a Latino director direct a very kind of niche Baltimore bike racing group, and the name is slipping my mind, but I saw the film this early this year at Sundance, and there was a Italian descent Brazilian that made a film featuring Igbo Nigerian culture. So that one is called Shine Your Eye, which is on Netflix. So there is I mean, I think what'll be happening is that we'll just keep having these conversations. And it is important to be aware of the history and knowing that there was colonization before, and then there's a way that you can colonize, you know, somebody else's culture and history. What I don't agree with is people bypassing and saying, because I'm a minority, as well, that these sorts of this sort of attention doesn't apply to me, and I can essentially do what I want to do. I can essentially, you know, take this African culture and take this from Zimbabwe, South Africa, Nigeria, and make my own story, because I am Black, because I can do what I want. And like that's, I don't agree or condone doing that sort of thing. But I think that there is a space where we can intermingle. And I think there just needs to be conversations. I don't think we're going to get it right right away. And this is not only just with Black cultures, but I think we'll see this as well with Asian cultures, as, you know, we are this global society, and these streaming companies, mostly Netflix, is disrupting a lot of what has been happening for the past years. So we're going to see more and more of this intermixing, and we just have to keep talking about it.
I think that's like a really interesting thing to talk about. So I think kind of surfacing from that. So as a Vietnamese person, as a Vietnamese refugee, like if I kind of lived the rest of my life and never saw an American film about the Vietnam War again, that would be a good thing. So to be honest, when Spike Lee, like when we heard that, you know, Five to Bloods was coming out, I had to think, like, what does a Black filmmaker, how am I going to feel about this when I see it? It's kind of interesting because, you know, with his history, you know, he's going to be able to like take on American racism, the Black experience. But interestingly enough, he couldn't, you know, his film, like American imperialism, is still something that has, you know, draws a long shadow on the whole film. And that really disappoints me. As someone who is as awesome as he is, that, you know, from a filmmaker like him to see Vietnamese people in the same way that white filmmakers have seen Vietnamese people, you know, as casualty and as fodder for, you know, their reimagining of that history, it's really disappointing. But it's, you know, we're kind of crossing into this space where it's like, it starts getting prickly about who gets to tell what when they are these kind of stories as well, where there is, you know, these intersections kind of coming together.
That's interesting because I saw the Five Bloods and I actually never thought about how Vietnamese people would feel about it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that you said that because it never occurred to me. But that's a perfect example of minorities portraying other minorities and how at times we also fall into the colonial trap and mindset, which we're also fighting against, but we're not aware of other people's own sensitivities. Akua, you're going to say something?
I was going to say, Chi, I apologize because I really enjoyed The Five Bloods because of its importance of telling a story that we hadn't seen before, the perspective of the Vietnam War or the American War through the eyes of African Americans. I mean, and it's just very interesting, some of the things that I thought that threw up from me, from Spike, who I'm a fan of, but, you know, can criticize some of his work. There were some things that as a Black woman, I was like, okay, so where's the Black woman in this film? And, you know, you've finally got this free reign and you're going to tell this story from an African-American perspective. And there's not much by way of Black women. And I wanted to throw in some Black love because I'm so starved. So it's just interesting and it's good. And these conversations are important because I would have potentially overlooked your perspective. I did overlook your perspective because I was so engrossed in the fact that it's four Black men telling this. I've never heard about the Vietnam War, the American War, told in that way. Even the fact that they renamed it American War, because it's always been the Vietnam War. And I'm not a historian and I don't really know about it. We weren't taught it in the UK in my schooling. So it's just always this Vietnam War and Americans come, you know, whatever, you know what the story is. So it's just really good to hear from you saying that, because I was like, I would have thought, well, this is really progressive. Well done, Spike. But hey.
Sorry, go on, Pamela.
Also, all I was going to say was that, like, for me, in an ideal world, all the films would have, so you could have Spike's version, and I would want to have a film from a Vietnamese person's point of view of that war to have equal weighting. That's what, because I think different viewpoints and different things are I don't, you know, I haven't seen the film. And I don't think that just because someone made something that they're right, but I would love to have again, what we talked about context and showing other things, to put it into context so that you have a more rounded view. The same way historians don't use one single source to prove that something happened. They use a variety of multiple sources. We should be doing that with film and giving maybe not equal weight, because I don't think an American point of view on that war should be equal weight to a Vietnamese person's point of view, but I would love to see more films about, or something from the other way, which I can't even think of a single film that is from the other way that I don't know of any. So there's an imbalance there.
So, I mean, that's the point I kind of want to make, is like, the only thing that fixes all the things that we talk about is all the things we talk about, the problems within the system come from a place where there's just narrative poverty. And the truth is, Spike's film is totally awesome if in the kind of narrative landscape there's everything else. Yeah. Like, Giri Haji is totally okay if there's all the other things that we need, you know. So there's this idea like there's everything, and there's often only these like massive problems with these things because, you know, there's so little of everything else. It's like, you know, and it's just transition to a narrative poverty to a kind of narrative kind of plenitude for that kind of allows all voices. It's just that for the longest time now, like the industry's only supported one type of voice.
Which is what I was talking about earlier, when I sort of said if everybody else had been able to tell a story, would have gone with the way that even mattered. You know, it probably, you know, they've still made a lot of money, and it would probably still be the like most successful film. But would it have bothered people as much if at the same time, you know, the Black person could tell a story from a Black person's perspective about what it was like at that time, you know? And I guess for me, this has always been the problem with the industry is I believe every voice deserves the opportunity to be heard. It's like, how do we make that happen? And then nobody's gonna feel like they've been kicked out. You know, it's just, because I think it'd be interesting, like I've been a female filmmaker, you know, people always kind of expect you to make a film with a woman at the heart of it. That has to be a woman's story. And women's story, of course, are romantic comedies or some life-changing drama about them going to India or on some midlife crisis, normally because a man left them or something. And, you know, and if I say, for example, I want to direct the next Bond film, you know, Twitter will probably have a meltdown. So it's that kind of thing as well. I feel like we'll probably get to real equality when people can just tell whatever story they want to tell. You know, like just the other week, there was the hoo-ha on social media when 3 white men were telling the Tiger Woods story, you know, the documentary Tiger Woods. And everybody was kind of like, and this is happening in the midst of Black Lives Matter and everything, and nobody ever thought it was okay to like bring a Black filmmaker in at some point. And those filmmakers probably considered themselves liberal. They didn't understand what the issue was, and they probably felt hurt at some point. Because I don't necessarily agree that we need to police who gets to tell what story. But I feel like if everybody gets the opportunity to tell the story that they want to tell, this kind of problems wouldn't happen. But I guess the question is, will we ever sort of reach that level of perfection? So I'll just take some last words from everybody. Like, what's your solution? How do you see us moving on from here? I'll start off with Akua.
I wanted time to think. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I hate that. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep striving. It's also, you know, wishy-washy. But it is about, I think, people from marginalized groups, whichever group you feel that doesn't get to tell their story the way they want to tell it, tell the story. It's very simplistic, but tell the story. And you have to just not be silent. Because I think as Pam said, lockdown has changed a few things. And I think people have had a lot of epiphanies and understanding and realizations. And there is that fear that the industry will just be a bit of wringing hands and cry and, oh God, we've been so bad. And then everything returns back to normal. But we have to, those of us who have had a corner, been able to hold on tight to that corner of the fabric of change, we need to keep on dragging it, because if we get complacent, and I think that's every type of movement, we have got, the children of the movement have become complacent, thinking that everything's okay. And we have to, it's a struggle and it's tiresome, but we have to remember that it's not okay. It's never ever going to be okay, because humans at large get complacent because no one really wants to fight. Everyone just likes the status quo to be the status quo. Let it be. You at the top, you at the bottom, let's keep quiet and keep it moving. Every so often, the people at the bottom are like, no, this is not good because we're really struggling out here. You lot are messing it up at the top. keep hold of the fabric of change and keep pulling. Don't get complacent. If you get tired, maybe take your hand off, let someone else's hand take over, take a rest and get back on it. Just don't get complacent. Don't think that it's just going to change just because we do one protest, we have one lockdown. We've got to keep talking and band together with your group and other groups. There are a lot of cliche things like collaboration and you've got to be allies and all that. I hate all those words. I hate saying them. However, that is the fact. It's me speaking to Chi and be like, oh, okay, so look, I know that someone's going to make a film and they're going to set some of it in Vietnam. Oh my God, let me speak to your group and let's us from marginalized groups become stronger together and be in more communication, because then it'll be harder for the minority who isn't us actually, especially if we banded together. We're not the minority, by the way. So, we could change things if we are also connected.
I mean, I just want to capitalize on that. I mean, during the latest kind of Black Lives Matters kind of protests, like I read this wonderful essay, which was like, if Asian power had combined with Black power, like we would not have the problems that we had today. And I feel like that. I want like a coalition between, all my, my Black brothers and sisters and my South Asian brothers and sisters. And we need to kind of come together, because I think we've been fighting this fight like really separated in our little corners and everything. And I think if we kind of really came together, it would be absolutely beautiful and terrifying and awesome. And yeah, brilliant.
I'm going to follow up on what she just said, which is because somebody told us that we all shouldn't be together because they were scared of the power of us being together. And I think that's where our strengths lie, in being together and reach out and share ideas, collaborate, and also remember that like times are changing and the old structures are failing. So don't be scared to try new things and new distribution methods. Like a theatrical release is not the be all and end all when people can have 85-inch screens at their home. Like I think embrace new technologies as well, because what's more important, like acclaim from academies and funds, or actually people responding to the story that you're telling? And I think when you figure out which one is what it is that you want more, then that will help you figure out how to do that.
Abbesi?
Yeah, I'm hopeful for the future, and I think that there's a lot that can be done to help move this forward. And I like to say that everyone has their own unique gifts and talents. So if for the people who aren't the loudest, maybe you're donating to organizations like Brown Girls Doc Mafia, or the National Hispanic Coalition for Media, or things like that. Like, put your money moves things. So you can do that. If you want to get out on the street and you want to protest, if you want to write a letter, if you want to make a film, if you want to do a podcast, if you want to just keep everybody use what you have to keep these conversations moving forward. And just know that it's going to take time. I mean, it's not going to be overnight. It's going to take time, and it gets frustrating. So yeah, I like the analogy of like, if you get tired of holding that cloth, take a break, give it to someone else. Then when you get back, your energy is up again, get back in there and do what you can, and don't criticize someone else if they're not doing what you're doing. Some people are like, well, where were you at the protest? I didn't see you. Where were you? I didn't see your name signed on this thing. And it's like, I was doing what I was doing. I was bailing out people from jail with my money. So, I think that's, and I guess as far as with education, again, people can work, somebody can speak to the chair, someone can come up and give a list of a decolonized film list to faculty, someone can do something, everybody can do their part in trying to decolonize film education. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. Universities are very bureaucratic, and things just don't happen with the snap of the finger. So there's a lot of different things people can do.
Yeah, there are, but I'm very happy that we're now having a conversation, and because I am one person who got frustrated with diversity conversation. So I sort of stopped talking. I was just kind of like, leave me alone and don't have me in your panel. Like, I'm not talking about diversity anymore. Because I remember I went to film school 2006, like 14 years ago. We were having these conversations. You know, the people before me were sort of telling me about all these things. And, you know, 10, 14 years later, we're still having them. Though I feel like 2020, even though people give it a lot of stick, I feel like it's the first year that I feel like the conversations are meaningful and that they could actually lead to something. Because there's even a fear that I probably had last year, speaking of, that I probably don't have now, because it's just become so much more normalized to accept that there's a problem that we need to address, even if we don't have all of the solutions. So I think for me, going forward, I think we should just keep talking. You know, I think that's the thing. I think if we keep talking and if we keep acknowledging, once you acknowledge that there's a problem, then it becomes easier to solve. And I think we can only get that through a conversation. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and thank you to our audience for staying with us. Check out the rest of the program. Lots of other fantastic panels and speakers coming up. Thank you.